Okay, so a little while ago I published a picture on my Facebook page, and my Nigel Bailey photography one, and somebody asked me whether or not I might on that one explain how I did that picture. And of course there's lots of aspects to that, but this blog is going to be about explaining exactly how I went about that, and I'm going to start first with some things in the way of composition. So let's get on with that. So when you look at this picture in the screen here, you'll see there's some fairly classic compositional rules that have been obeyed here. So firstly, the most basic one is the rule of thirds. So if we divide the picture up into thirds, as you can see on this grid here, so we've got 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, etc. Then you'll notice that this gateway here, which kind of forms, to some degree at least, the subject of focus of the picture, is pretty much, not exactly, but it's pretty much on the intersection of the left and bottom third line there, and then you'll also notice, and that this is no accident, that along the this sort of near horizon, if you like, of this the top of this hill fort, that also is along a 1/3 compositional line, and that here for me the main part of this picture and the composition was the descending of the hill fog early in the morning, and so you'll notice that I've therefore made the sky, if you like, or the fog, the mist that's coming in, the main subject of this picture. And there's also a little bit of foreground interest. It's not particularly dramatic, but there's this defensive ditch here in the foreground and some tusks of grass. So compositionally it obeys the rules of the rule of thirds, and it's a rule, of course, that can be broken, but that's what I've done when I've set this particular one up. I did another version of this shot actually, and I'll just click on that now, and you'll see that I've experimented on this one with putting it the other way and making the foreground the main interest, and the third is the other way up, basically. So the sky or the fog represents less of it, and the foreground represents a much larger part of the picture. But I think actually this version works pretty well. This was shot at dawn, and so a major excuse me, a major part of the taking of this picture is simply in the planning. You have to be there at the right time, and this was well, let's see if I can't actually remember exactly what time of year it was, but I think it's February or something like that. Let's see if I can find out in the on here. There we go, 1st of February 2010. So yeah, long time ago. It was very cold, and it meant that I had to be there at this location well before dawn, and it's about an hour and a half drive from home. Dawn would probably have been something like about 6:30, maybe 7 o'clock or something. So that meant getting up really early to be there on time. It meant climbing this large hill in complete darkness pretty much, and being ready with my kit before dawn. So you have to plan these things. You have to keep an eye on what you think the weather is going to be like as well. If you want to get pictures, you've got to be out there amongst the wind and the weather, and you've got to be there at the right time. I also did some scouting ahead on this particular picture by checking things out on Google, and before I went, just to make sure I knew exactly where I was going, and what sort of pictures I might be able to take there. So compositionally, it obeys the rule of thirds, if you like. And if we go back into develop mode, we can see some of the the ways in which the picture itself was taken. Firstly, it's quite a long exposure. It's 1 second, and with quite a small aperture. So I took this on a tripod, and with a wide angle, relatively wide angle lens, 17mm. This is on a cropped sensor, and so on a full frame sensor, that's probably equivalent to something like about 24-25mm wide angle lens. So it's not massively wide, but it's wide enough for what I was trying to do. And the lens was a 17-55mm lens, so I'm at its widest possible field of view. f/16 is quite a small aperture, and that gives me a lot of depth of field, so I can be, as long as I focus in the right place, then I've got focus right from relatively close foreground to fairly deep into the picture. And so it should and particularly because I'm at a wide angle, then I should find that as long as I focus somewhere in the, fairly near foreground, then pretty much the whole picture should be sharp. And I've got this on ISO 200 so that I don't get too much noise. It's dark at this point. It's actually pretty dim, and so that's reflected in the shot. It may look underexposed, but that simply reflects the fact that it was dark. I could have exposed it for twice as long and got an extra stop of light, but that wouldn't have been how it actually looked, and so I've exposed it for what were the ambient light conditions, basically. You'll notice, and this by the way is the unprocessed picture, shot as a JPEG. And but you'll notice, in fact, that there's it's got this kind of purple cast on it, and that color cast, and that's because I was using a graduated neutral density filter by Kokin. I have new graduated filters now that don't leave this kind of color cast, but the Kokin ones are famous for leaving this sort of purple magenta type color cast, which is really hard to get rid of in post-processing. But what it did help me to do was to balance the light levels between the sky and the ground, so that those are pretty much in balance in this picture. So that was it about taking the picture, but in terms of post-processing, I then faced the decision, well, what do I do with this picture? And what I posted recently on Facebook was something like this. This is a slightly different version of it, but what I'm going to try and do is show you how I got from this and then to this in a relatively small number of steps. So this is the post-processing phase. I did the post-processing with Lightroom, and because I'm actually working on a JPEG picture here, I don't know why I shot this in JPEG. Normally I'm shooting in RAW, and JPEG does significantly reduce the scope that you have for changing the picture in post-processing, for getting back more detail than you might see in the original picture before you've done the processing. But because RAW captures a lot more information than JPEG, and it gives you a lot more post-processing flexibility. But this was fairly early on in my digital landscape career, if I can call it that, and so I was just taking pictures in JPEG at this point, apparently. I just want to go in and check that, because I'm not absolutely convinced that was the case. I'm just going to unstack all of these earlier versions of it, and because I was fairly sure that at some point what I actually had here, that somewhere I had DNG versions of these pictures. It doesn't matter. We'll work with this one for the time being. Okay. So where to start? So I'm looking for this kind of end result, and this is what's called a two-tone image, but I'm going to start by reducing the vibrance in the picture. That will take a lot of the colour out of it. I don't want to take it away completely, but we're going to take away virtually all of the colour, and we're going to also massively reduce the saturation level in the picture. I'm going to work with the blacks as well, so we're going to try and get a bit more contrast. So I'm holding down the shift key here, and I'm moving the black slider top right here until we just start to get some blacks coming in. So that means that in the darker parts of the picture we're still seeing detail, and similarly with the highlights. So let's just do the same there. Oh, it's the other way round here. Actually, we're not gonna bring those in at all. That's okay, because we've not got anything blown out in this picture. I'm going to bring up the exposure a little, because I think it is probably a bit underexposed in terms of the effect that I'm looking for in post-processing. And then I'm going to go into the split toning editor here. And what you can do here is you can say that depending on whether or not you're looking at highlights, the brighter areas of the picture, or the shadows of the picture, that you effectively are allocating different colour hues and levels of saturation to those highlights versus shadows, and that's where your colour contrast comes from. So I'm going to just bring this up to something like about 50 or so, and we're going to increase the saturation to about 60 something, 65, 66. So you'll see we're starting to get this kind of brownish, creamish tone in there, and that's just by working with the highlights. Then I'm going to do something similar with the shadows. I'll go to about 30 there on the saturation, and a similar sort of level with with the hue, and then a similar level with the saturation. And so we've now got this kind of rusty-ish looking, relatively dark brown hue to it. It goes back to the basics. The picture's now quite dark, so I'm going to take the whites here, and we're going to increase the whites, not too much. A lot of this is quite touchy-feely really, and just increase the exposure just a tad. Okay, but we've got this. We're not looking too bad. Now the colour is a little bit magenta in there at the minute, and so one, I'm going to warm it up a bit here with the colour temperature slider, and I'm going to remove some of this magenta tint as well. So I'm going to take the colour temperature down, the colour tint down from magenta down towards green, and so we've got much less of that kind of tint now. I'd like a bit more contrast in this picture. There's a couple of ways that I could do that. I can either just increase the contrast slider here, or maybe a bit of both. I can also increase the clarity. Now I don't want to do too much of that, because in terms of the clarity, because what I don't want to do is start accentuating grain in this very soft part of the picture. Now I'm then going to deal with the detail so that we can sharpen the image, but we only want to sharpen part of the image. We don't want to sharpen this foggy area of the image. That would be daft. So click on sharpen for scenic over here, and the way that we make sure that we're only sharpening the bits that we want to sharpen, we hold down the Alt key on the keyboard, and we slide the masking slider here until we get only those parts of the picture that are highlighted in white, with the white lines here will be those that are sharpened. So you can see there it was basically sharpening just pretty much the darker parts of the edges in the foreground part of the picture. So we're doing okay here. I just want to look at the noise levels in this, and you'll see we've got a fair bit of graininess in this picture. So I'm going to reduce the level of, increase the level of noise reduction with this slider here. Don't want to overdo it, because that will make some of these areas just kind of too soft. But we've got some control over the way noise reduction is applied. So if we click on the detail slider here, so I've clicked it right down there versus having it up at this end, you'll find that we want somewhere probably a bit over halfway here. It's going to be maybe 2/3 of the way. It's going to be a reasonable compromise in terms of how much of the noise in the image we're getting rid of. Okay, so we're not doing too bad here. We're nearly done with this. And then the other thing that I want to do, I want to apply a little bit of a vignette just to draw the view into the middle of the picture. So, but it needs to be relatively subtle. So we go to Effects here, and we're going to just put in a little bit of a vignette. And it's a bit left-sided here. I mean, that's just an artifact of the fact that the light is coming from this part of the picture, area of the picture, more than it is on the left-hand side. So we don't want to go crazy with this. I could use a radial filter. I mean, that wasn't available when I first did this particular picture, when I first processed this, but Lightroom has improved quite a lot since then. So I could use a radial filter, and so we could take this area of the picture, let's bring it more down over there, and be a bit more selective about what part of the image is actually highlighted. Now, I don't want to be quite that dramatic about it, but you get the idea that this gives us a little bit more control over how the let's just sort of, no, I want to go the other way a little bit, actually, something like that. I'm just trying to get the shape so it's relatively symmetrical. I've deliberately got more of a vignette than I really want here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to reduce now the amount by which the exposure is being changed. So we're going to slide up here back towards, maybe take something like maybe half a stop off it, certainly no more than that. Let's just slide it over that way. Okay, and I think we want to make sure that we've not got that extra bit of saturation that was locked on there for some reason. And let's just widen this out a bit. Okay, what will that look like if we just take it down a little? It's actually quite nice, I quite like that. And then we can change the amount of feather in it, so we can have more or less feather. So Lightroom 6 gives you a lot of control here with this. Maybe just fiddle around with this a bit more. So I didn't have the option to do this earlier when I first processed this picture. I actually quite like that. The other thing that we could do on here, if we wanted to, there is a facility now or this utility called Haze, or effect called Haze, and of course the thing about this picture is we want the haze, but do we want it in the foreground particularly? Let's just see what happens if we just put a little bit of Haze in there. It just lets a little bit, it's very dim, it's very subtle. You just start to see a little bit of these fields that are down below here, at the below the hill, and this shoulder of a hill rising up there out of the mist in the background, and it kind of makes it look quite dramatic, really. Then the other thing that I did on this was I put a little bit of a tone curve on it. That just takes the dark, the blacks down a little bit there, the highlights up a little bit more here, and you end up with this really moody shot. I mean, I think I've probably done enough to this now. It's one of those things where you could fiddle and fiddle and fiddle, but actually I think I'm relatively happy with this. If we look at the foreground, we've got reasonably good sharpness here. I mean, the whole picture is a bit soft, but then I was fighting the hill fog all the way, and really quite a heavy hoarfrost that kept descending on the filters that I was using. But actually I think that's given a fairly interesting, it's resulted in quite an interesting picture. So I like the look of that. Let's just see what that looks like. There's a full screen. If I press F on my keyboard, then we see the whole screen, which has highlighted the fact that I haven't yet got rid of some of these nasty little specks on my sensor. So I'm going to do that now, and there's quite a neat trick here that if we go into the spot removal tool, you now have, which we didn't have again originally, we now have in Lightroom this visualize spots option, and you can vary here how sensitive or otherwise it is. And what you'll find is these kind of little circular type things that I'm highlighting now, these are where we've got spots or specks on the sensor. So I'm just going to use the spot removal tool to get rid of those. It's quite easily done, and some of these won't really show up, but one or two of them were really quite obvious and definitely need to be got rid of. Okay, I'm just going to turn off the information on the screen just to make sure we didn't have anything up there, which we don't. Oh, there you go, there's the date, 2nd of January in fact it was, so that this picture was taken. And well, according to this, 9:05 in the morning, but I suspect that's probably because my camera time was incorrect. I know for a fact it was earlier than that. Okay, so let's just turn the visualize spots off again now. We'll just take another full frame look at it, and there we go. We've got this very moody kind of landscape on the top of Hambledon Hill, ancient hill fort. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and that's how we put this kind of picture together. It's about the planning, it's about the composition, to some degree it's about the camera and the tools that you use, but also in this particular image quite a lot of it is about how you deal with it in post-processing and your workflow through that. Okay, see you next time.